The Nether is a scary place. In fact, for those of you who have been watching me for ages, you may remember that I used to be absolutely terrified of the Nether. I used to never go here. And the thought of exploring the Nether, to me, was absolutely horrifying. But now I'm a changed man, and in today's video I'm going to give you some tips on how to effectively build in the Nether. Tip number 1 is don't stick to the overworld, you nutcase. Well, this was an easy video to make. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure this has been very enlightening for a lot of you. The real tip number 1 is definitely don't build in this Nether biome. Because, I mean, just look at this. I swap over from peaceful mode, and within probably about 10 seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ghasts are visible from eyeline. Okay? Soul Sand Valleys, nah. Nothing should be constructed here. Tip number 2, and this especially applies to redstone builds because often they have circuitry underneath the ground. Dig out the area first, okay? The Nether obviously has loads and loads of pockets of lava. They can definitely catch you off guard. The last thing that you want to do is build up a redstone contraption, realize you need some extra space, start mining out for that extra space, and then suddenly have it flooded by lava. Lava is basically just a worse version of water when it comes to redstone contraptions. It's not going to end well. Tip number 3. If your build is sufficiently big and it's going to take you a decent length of time, invest some time in constructing decent ghast walls, aka ones better than this one that I've constructed, as I can see a ghast right there who would be able to blast me. For goodness sake, this is embarrassing. But the point still stands. If you build something like this, it's going to save you a lot of frustration, especially if you're building something that's very delicate, like a redstone contraption that could easily be exploded. You're going to love yourself for building this. But of course, once you're done, remember to take it down. I mean, it is horrendously ugly. Okay, there's no denying that. We all know I love a good wool-based redstone contraption. I would say that about 80% of my redstone testing world is actually wool. But if you build a redstone in the Nether, don't do this. I know it looks good, okay? I know it's cool, it's fancy, it's nice. But if a ghast hits that, all of that's going to catch fire. The wool's not going to stand a chance. Just, it's a bad time waiting to happen. Tip number 5. See, I don't know. A bow and arrow is very, very necessary to carry with you at all times in the Nether. Even the skeletons are quite difficult, let alone all the ghasts as well. I mean, yeah, you need to have this. Didn't help me very much, but you do need it. Seriously, if you go into the Nether without a bow and arrow, just expect problems. When you're working in the Nether, there's a high chance that you're going to be going back and forth from your base quite a bit in the overworld to pick up resources and things, so get yourself set up with a proper Nether tunnel that takes you between your Nether portal and the place that you're working in the Nether. Compounded over time, it is going to save you a lot of time. Now, if you don't really fancy doing that, at the very least, take a screenshot of the coordinates of your Nether portal, okay? It takes 2 seconds to do it, and you will love yourself if you get lost. Because the number of times I've built up a Nether portal, then gone adventuring, maybe I've got a little bit disorientated, and I end up spending hours traveling around looking for this little thing. It's a nightmare, okay? It's an absolute nightmare. Just take the screenshot, save it away, you know, and then you're safe. And if you couple that with this next tip, which is to leave markers pointing in the direction of the Nether portal, then you're golden, okay? If you find yourself getting lost, just navigate your way roughly to the coordinates, then as soon as you start seeing those markers, you're going to find your way straight to the Nether portal, and you're going to be able to locate it. It's these sorts of tips that honestly can save your brain, okay? Because there's nothing worse than losing a Nether portal. As I mentioned earlier on, if you're working in the Nether, there's a high chance that you're going to be transporting lots of items. If you have access to them, 100% you should be using shulker boxes for this. It is just so much more efficient than transporting all of the items in your inventory. You can then take bulk supplies across, and I would also suggest getting yourself set up with an ender chest with a lot of the items that you need on the regular, just so that you can easily access those too as well, because there's nothing more annoying than having to go all the way back to your base just to pick up a couple of sticks. And while we're on the topic of end game things, netherite equipment, if you can manage to make it, then yeah, I mean, not only do you look really, really cool, but also if you do die, thankfully at least your tools and your armor are going to be saved. It's still going to be rubbish, alright, you're going to lose all the other stuff that was in your inventory, but this stuff, this will be fine. This next one is a very, very important one to avoid any nasty surprises. Make sure that if you're doing large scale builds in the Nether, like the Nether portal on the Hermitcraft server, you make sure that they're ghast proof, okay? So all of this floor here is glass. No ghasts can spawn on that, but also on top of the Nether portals you may notice some carpet. that stops ghasts from spawning as well. Because otherwise, yeah, this place, it would just fill up with ghasts and there'd be holes everywhere. It'd be a nightmare. Now, this next tip applies to Minecraft 1.15 and onwards. If you're working around piglins, it probably would be worth carrying a quick change of equipment, allowing you to quickly pop into golden armor, which they much prefer. That's a really interesting game mechanic, isn't it? Suddenly, nobody likes me. Craziness! As you can probably tell, I hadn't actually experimented with that before that clip. That's so cool, isn't it? What an awesome idea. Now this one is so obvious that it almost feels like it's not worth mentioning, but fire resistance is probably a good thing to carry with you while you're working in the nether. I wouldn't necessarily say have it on you all the time, but if you're, say, working somewhere and then you fall off the edge into a lava lake, at least with a fire resistance potion, there's a chance that you're going to survive. Bring one. And I know that is very hypocritical coming from me, someone who never ever has fire resistance potions on them. This video is definitely a do as I say and not as I do. Also, I'm looking very worse for wear right now, aren't I? If it doesn't really matter where your build is actually going to be, if it's not location dependent, I would say try to avoid building near a nether fortress. Reason being, blaze. Blaze have ridiculous range, they're very accurate, and they're extremely good at just catching you off guard. You know, I swear, I never get hit by a blaze unless I'm stood on something that if I fall off it, I'm definitely 100% going to die. But if you really want to build a nether portal or near a nether portal, then this is how you block off a blaze spawner, which, weirdly enough, this is actually a double blaze spawner. That's incredibly uncommon. I'm kind of surprised by that. Anyway, as I was saying, the first thing that you need to do is clear out all of the blocks around it. That is task number 1. Then you need to build up a 9x9x3 area of solid blocks around the blaze spawner, and that will stop any of them from popping in. Because the last thing that you want to do is actually destroy blaze spawners, because they can be a really useful source for XP, but most importantly, blaze rods. Blaze rods are an excellent fuel source. Now listen, I am definitely not one to give building tips, okay, but I feel like this one is potentially worth mentioning. The nether is quite a dark place and quite a moody place, and your block palette for your builds should probably reflect this, because even not that bright blocks suddenly start to look really bright in the nether. I mean, look at those iron bars. They're not very bright, yet suddenly in the nether, they actually start to look really bright. And it's the same with these furnaces here. I mean, think what they look like in the overworld. You'd barely even notice them, but suddenly they really stand out and contrast with the environment around them when we're in this slightly darker place. Now, I'm not saying that you should build your entire structure out of netherite, because that's bonkers. This would take a couple lifetimes to mine, but still, it's something that you should keep in mind. Now, just as a quick disclaimer, in this next tip, I did break an earlier rule. Just try your best to ignore it. I think it goes without saying, but if you're building up a delicate structure, especially if it's a redstone contraption where the blast resistance of the components is literally 0, build up some form of defensive wall around it. Don't just have things exposed like this, because although it may look cool, it only takes one stray ghast fireball to completely ruin your day. Now, this may seem like overkill, but I personally am very sensitive to this sort of stuff. When you're working on a build in survival mode, perhaps surrounded by zombie pigmen, it's probably smart to have some form of quick exit nether portal or some form of safe house just in case things go wrong. You know, it doesn't take much to anger pigmen, and if you can just quickly escape from there and get yourself out of the situation, then you're going to be quite happy. Then you can head over to an armory, get geared up, and go back and attack them with a vengeance. Which, actually, on the topic of zombie pigmen, I feel like it's worth mentioning. I would suggest using ender pearls very sparingly. Let me just give a quick demonstration. I mean, it didn't even hurt you, dude. But still, they don't like it, okay? And we have to accept the fact that zombie pigmen don't like it. They're gonna kill you if you hit them with an ender pearl, so just be careful. Now, this one I feel is incredibly important, but also something that I never seem to do. You should always have access to some form of flint and steel. I personally would suggest putting it in an ender chest, but if you don't have the luxury of an ender chest, then have it in your inventory, because it doesn't take much for a ghast to explode your nether portal, and then you're really going to struggle to find a way home. But what happens if a ghast does explode your nether portal and you don't have a flint and steel? What do you do then? Well, some would say that the best plan of action is actually to try and tempt that same ghast to reignite your nether portal. I mean, it's definitely scary. Okay, and it's definitely not fun, but it does actually work. But if the ghast has disappeared or despawned, then there is another option, and that is to make use of flammable blocks to try and get the fire to actually travel through the nether portal. So you need to do something like this. Okay, you need to get yourself set up with almost like a fuse, where the fire is going to try and make its way across to this wood block, but then it's going to ignite the nether portal in the process. I'm sincerely hoping that this actually functions. One thing that I will say is it takes a really, really long time. So I'm going to use some slightly cheaty methods. There we go. There we go. There we go. We got ourselves a nether portal. Obviously, this does require that you carry with you some leaves and some wood, which, you know, might not be that common, but it does work. And I'm sure you can use other items other than leaves and wood. That's just a good example. Be extremely, extremely careful of building on gravel. You wouldn't want that sort of thing happening, okay? I mean, that was just a small scale thing. There are occasions in the nether where just entire areas of gravel just plummet down into lava lakes. You have to be so wary, because otherwise you can have a very, very bad day indeed. Anyway, for my final and probably most important tip, it's, once again, don't build in the nether, you maniac. What are you doing? This place is awful. Look, there's ghast everywhere. Everything is trying to set you on fire. There's death around every corner. Just stop. And with that's the end. I hope that you enjoyed. Leave a like if you liked. Subscribe if you want to subscribe. I haven't said that in ages, but you should. You should do those things. I don't know what to say from that. I'm not very good at shameless self-promotion or anything. I'm terrible at it, in fact. I find it so awkward and horrible. I just want this video to end.